Deep within the rainforests of Malaysia, crews from China are carving out tunnels so massive you could easily park 10 football pitches inside them, end to end. They are throwing tracks over wide rivers and raising towering bridges above thick jungles where trains have never run. And Malaysia is just a single piece of the puzzle. This exact same drive is unfolding in Laos, where a freshly built Chinese rail line already links the landlocked nation straight to southern China. It is inching closer to Thailand, driving the iron path ever southward. And the final destination for all this steel? Singapore, the wealthy financial hub sitting at the very bottom of Asia. China is forging an unbroken railway corridor, stretching from its own borders all the way down to the equator, cutting right through 8 different nations. This massive effort belongs to China's Belt and Road Initiative. It is a sweeping global strategy to lay down new infrastructure across Asia, Africa, and Europe. The ultimate goal is to make global trade swifter, much cheaper, and far more reliant on pathways that Beijing helps manage. The prize is not just transporting people. It is about moving oil, raw materials, and factory goods across solid land, bypassing the need to depend totally on congested ocean routes. If you appreciate deep dives into massive topics like this, taking a second to hit the like button really helps me bring you more epic stories. And there is plenty more on the way. Right now, let us dig into the $16 billion railway at the heart of this master plan, what it actually took to construct it, why it was nearly canceled forever, and what it signals for the destiny of an entire region. To truly grasp why China pinpointed Malaysia as a vital link in this grand network, you first have to understand a massive headache Malaysia has endured for decades. Once you see it, Beijing's involvement makes perfect sense. On a map, Malaysia looks unified, but it certainly does not function like one. Over on the west coast, you have Kuala Lumpur, Port Klang, and the vast majority of the nation's industrial power crammed into one busy area. The Klang Valley by itself generates upwards of 30% of Malaysia's total wealth. It acts as the heartbeat of the entire nation, managing most of the manufacturing, shipping, and trade logistics. Port Klang handles over 13 million shipping containers every single year, cementing it as a powerhouse port in Southeast Asia and a vital hub in global shipping. But as soon as you look to the east, the picture shifts dramatically. States like Kelantan, Terengganu, and Pahang lack the same heavy industry. Development has lagged, and the existing roads were never designed to carry massive amounts of freight. If a factory on the eastern shore wants to move products to the west, there is no straight shot. Trucks must slowly navigate winding, steep mountain passes that drag travel times to an absolute crawl. Hauling cargo from one coast to the other can easily consume 12 to 15 hours on the road, depending on the weather. That is more than just a hassle. It is a massive structural roadblock to economic growth that has held the eastern states back for a very long time. But the issues do not end there. Malaysia is positioned right along the Strait of Malacca, one of the most vital shipping lanes on the planet. Upwards of 90,000 vessels squeeze through this tight stretch of water annually, carrying oil from the Middle East, electronics from China, raw resources from Southeast Asia, and goods destined for Europe. Every last one of those cargo ships is forced to sail the long way around the bottom tip of the Malaysian peninsula, just to cross from one side to the other. That detour piles on extra time, extra fuel, and extra expenses to a route the entire global economy relies upon daily. This is exactly the gap China recognized. Here is a nation bordering the busiest shipping lane on Earth, suffering from a massive east-west divide that nobody had managed to fix, largely because the geography made it incredibly difficult. For Beijing, curing Malaysia's transport problem and advancing its own regional ambitions were the exact same move. That is how the East Coast Rail Link was born, and that is exactly why China is the one building it. The East Coast Rail Link, or the ECRL, is an extensive rail line slicing straight through peninsular Malaysia from west to east. The entire route spans roughly 665 kilometers. It kicks off at Port Klang on the western shore, drives inland past the Kuala Lumpur region, punches through the central mountain range, hits Kuantan on the eastern shore, and then extends straight up north to Kota Baru, right near the border with Thailand. That final destination is hugely important, and we will return to it shortly. The tracks are laid using standard gauge, which is 1,435 millimeters wide. This is the exact same standard utilized by bullet trains and heavy freight systems all over the globe, meaning faster trips, better stability, and the ability to haul much heavier loads than Malaysia's older rail network. Passenger trains will cruise at up to 160 kilometers an hour. Once fully operational, freight trains will haul millions of tons of cargo annually. The blueprint includes over 20 stations, featuring cargo terminals and logistics hubs built right next to industrial parks, so factories can load goods directly onto trains without long truck rides in between. But carving out this railway is not just a matter of clearing land and placing tracks. Slap bang in the middle of the peninsula is the Titiwangsa Range, a 480-kilometer wall of sheer cliffs, thick jungle, and unstable slopes. You cannot go around it. The train has to go straight through it, and doing so forced the engineers to tackle some of the most complex construction work in Southeast Asian history. The project demands more than 40 tunnels with a combined length stretching over 50 kilometers. One single tunnel alone runs for more than 16 kilometers, making it one of the longest railway tunnels in the entire region. These underground pathways cut through solid, hard rock in certain spots, and softer, dangerous soil in others. Because of this, builders cannot rely on just one technique. Some areas require giant tunnel boring machines that grind through the mountain non-stop. Other sections rely on the drill and blast method, where crews manually drill, plant controlled explosives, and clear the rubble out chunk by chunk. Furthermore, roughly 30 to 40% of the whole track is lifted into the sky on elevated viaducts, raising the rails safely over rivers, swampy ground, and uneven terrain. Malaysia gets dumped with over 2,500 millimeters of rain every year in many areas. Monsoon seasons bring fierce floods, mudslides, and shifting earth that can easily wipe out new structures if they are not engineered to handle those extreme forces from day one. Every single bridge, tunnel entrance, and raised section has to be designed to survive decades of harsh weather, not just the conditions of a clear morning on the construction site. Then, you have to consider the sheer isolation. Vast stretches of the planned route slice through remote wilderness, entirely untouched by roads. Before any actual rail work could even start, crews had to hack out temporary dirt roads, build massive base camps, and haul incredibly heavy machinery into deep jungle that had never witnessed equipment of this magnitude. The manpower driving this is a blend of local Malaysian laborers working alongside Chinese specialists and engineers. With thousands of workers spread across various sites simultaneously, the mammoth China Communications Construction Company, one of the globe's biggest infrastructure giants, stepped in as the lead contractor. Funding was largely pumped in by China's Export-Import Bank. The initial price tag was pegged at roughly 65 billion Malaysian ringgit, or about 16 billion US dollars, cementing it as one of the priciest public works in Malaysia's history. For a stretch, building proceeded smoothly. But in 2018, a new Malaysian administration took office and slammed the brakes, freezing the massive project completely. The issue wasn't the train line itself. It was the paperwork. Was the debt load dangerously high? Were the loan terms skewed too far to China's advantage? Was Malaysia genuinely getting $16 billion worth of value? These were serious, valid concerns, and the new leaders demanded answers before laying another inch of track. At this juncture, the whole enterprise could have easily died forever. Megaprojects that halt at this stage almost never recover. Yet, Malaysia didn't scrap it. Instead, they returned to the bargaining table and fought aggressively for a fairer deal. Following months of intense haggling, the total cost was slashed down to about 44 billion ringgit, shaving off nearly a third of the original price. Certain sections of the path were tweaked to reduce engineering headaches, and by 2019, The machines were running again. That compromise is actually a crucial chapter of this saga. Malaysia wielded enough bargaining power to stand up to a global superpower and secure a substantially improved contract. And Beijing accepted those new terms instead of packing up and leaving. That reveals a critical truth. China desperately wanted this railway finished, not simply to help Malaysia, but because of exactly where these tracks fit inside a sprawling master plan that had been quietly advancing for years. If you zoom out from the Malaysian peninsula, the broader vision comes sharply into focus. The ECRL isn't just fixing a local transport glitch. It is a single link in an enormous chain. China is linking together across Southeast Asia, a chain meant to tie the whole region together by steel, from China's southern edge straight down to Singapore. This is known as the Pan-Asian Railway, or the Kunming-Singapore Line. The grand idea is one uninterrupted rail artery flowing through Laos, Thailand, and Malaysia, before finally stopping in Singapore. Once it is fully realized, cargo and travelers could ride from Kunming in southern China all the way to the absolute bottom of Asia without ever boarding a boat or catching a flight. We are talking about thousands of kilometers of linked railways piercing through 8 separate nations, entirely financed and constructed by a Chinese-led network. And this isn't just a fantasy on paper. It is actively being constructed, piece by piece. The China-Laos Railway officially launched in December of 2021, spanning over 1,000 kilometers from Kunming down into Vientiane, the Laotian capital. Prior to these tracks, Laos was deeply landlocked and arguably one of the most economically disconnected nations in Southeast Asia. Freight crawled. Accessing broader markets was incredibly tough, but the train flipped that reality almost instantly. Within just a few years of operation, cargo numbers surged. Chinese companies began setting up shop in Laos at an unprecedented speed. Freight that previously took days to navigate over terrible roads now crossed the border in a matter of hours. Laos transformed from an isolated outpost into a central hub of an expanding regional web. From the Laotian border, the route presses south into Thailand. A high-speed rail link bridging Vientiane to Bangkok is currently being built, driving the iron road deeper down the continent. From Bangkok, the blueprint pushes south to the Malaysian frontier. And that is precisely where the top end of the ECRL enters the picture. The tracks end near Kota Bharu, practically touching Thailand. In June 2024, China's Premier Li Qiang publicly announced Beijing's willingness to look into merging the ECRL with the rail systems of Laos and Thailand. That is an active head of state formally declaring an intent to finish the puzzle. If all these pieces snap together, a locomotive could depart Kunming, roll through Laos, cross Thailand, traverse Malaysia, and pull into Singapore without a single piece of cargo ever touching a shipping deck or an airplane cargo hold. This proves the ECRL is much more than Malaysia's fix for its own geographic divide. It is the Malaysian segment of a massive track running from China's front door down to the equator. Now, tie all of this back to the Belt and Road Initiative. The BRI is Beijing's worldwide infrastructure push, planting roads, ports, pipelines, and rail networks spanning Asia, Africa, and Europe. On paper, the aim is to boost global connections and make commerce quicker and more affordable. But in practice, nations adopting Chinese-built projects often form profound, lasting reliances on Chinese engineering standards, Chinese hardware, Chinese loans, and increasingly, Chinese management once the projects go live. Case in point, in 2024, a joint venture between Malaysia and China was formally created to run and maintain the ECRL once the building phase wraps up. Beijing's footprint here doesn't fade when the final spike is driven. It will linger for decades to come. For Beijing, this Southeast Asian rail web also solves an urgent strategic vulnerability. The Strait of Malacca, that tiny waterway sitting between Malaysia and Indonesia, sees upwards of 90,000 vessels pass through annually. China relies intensely on this singular bottleneck for its incoming oil, raw materials, and outbound exports. If that channel were ever choked off, blocked, or dominated by a hostile military, the fallout for the Chinese economy would be catastrophic. Carving a land-based rail artery through Southeast Asia hands China a solid overland backup plan. It won't completely replace the strait, as global shipping volumes are simply too massive. However, it severely lessens the danger of relying on one vulnerable choke point for so much of their trade. For urgent freight, non-bulk items, and companies demanding supply chain flexibility, a direct train from Kunming to Singapore completely rewrites the rulebook. So what does all this mean for Malaysia and the other nations on this path? For Malaysia, the ECRL cures a headache that has been worsening for decades. Once the trains start rolling, cargo that used to spend up to 15 hours winding across the peninsula by truck will complete the journey in a fraction of the time. Factories along the line will gain direct rail links to Port Klang, finally connecting the eastern states to one of Southeast Asia's megaports on a massive scale. Businesses that historically shunned the East Coast because transport was too sluggish and costly will now have a very real reason to set up shop there. The new tracks also forge what logistics experts refer to as a land bridge. A shipping container pulling into Port Klang from Europe or the Middle East won't necessarily have to jump back on a boat to reach the South China Sea. Instead, it can be loaded onto a train, zip across the mainland, and arrive at eastern ports much quicker than a cargo ship, taking the long way around the peninsula. For urgent shipments, factories running strict schedules, or moments when the western docks are overflowing, this shortcut holds serious financial value. Malaysia transforms from a landmass that cargo sails around into a bustling corridor that cargo flows directly through. Across the wider region, the impacts multiply every time a new stretch of track is finished. Nations that were once difficult to access suddenly open up. Supply chains locked into ocean freight now gain a dependable overland option. Smaller countries positioned along the tracks are pulled from the margins and placed right in the heart of a booming network. Laos is already feeling the massive effects of this pivot. Thailand is next in line. Malaysia will follow. And ultimately Singapore, already the economic powerhouse of the region, stands to become the final southern stop for a train line born in China. As of 2026, building crews are actively grinding away at multiple sections of the ECRL all at once. The massive bores through the Titiwangsa Range are pushing forward day by day, carefully navigating treacherous underground geology. Down in the flatter zones, the concrete pillars, raised viaducts, and station bases are already highly visible. The current timeline points to a completion window between 2026 and 2027, with plans to open specific chunks of the line in phases before the entire route runs smoothly from end to end. When those doors finally open, Malaysia won't simply be more unified domestically. It will become a concrete link in a colossal rail chain spanning from the Chinese border to the equator. Step back far enough, and the true magnitude of this construction becomes impossible to ignore. Beijing isn't just funding a solitary railway in an isolated country. They are piecing together a massive web, where each finished segment makes completing the next one even more vital and valuable. The Laotian line is active. The Thai segment is being poured and welded. The Malaysian stretch is coming alive kilometer by kilometer. And Singapore is still locked in talks regarding a high-speed link up to Kuala Lumpur. Looked at individually, these just seem like local nations fixing their own transport gaps. But viewed as a whole, they form the skeleton of a megasystem that will completely rewrite how this half of the globe travels, trades, and interacts for the next century. The physical presence of these tracks is already shifting realities on the ground. Cargo traffic on the China-Laos line has steadily climbed since day one. Chinese money pouring into Laos has spiked dramatically. Local businesses across the region are now baking rail logistics into their supply chain math in ways that were impossible just a few years ago. These are just the early tremors of a massive shift that speeds up every time a new station opens its doors. For the nations sitting along this corridor, the main question isn't whether this new connectivity is useful. It obviously is. Modern infrastructure, rapid trade, and plugging into a massive regional grid are very real, very necessary upgrades. The real question is what it means to rely on a single foreign superpower to finance, build, and partially manage all of it. How will these countries balance that dynamic in the decades to come as this rail network sinks deeper into their daily economic survival? China isn't just constructing a train line. It is engineering the future of an entire region, one steel tie at a time. And the $16 billion path slicing through the Malaysian rainforest is one of the most critical pieces of that exact future currently being set in stone. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of what's really happening across Southeast Asia, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our future deep dives. Make sure to ring the notification bell, because we have more coverage on China's massive infrastructure moves across the region dropping very soon. Finally, leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you view this mega railway as the greatest leap forward for Southeast Asia in modern history, or are there hidden costs that the region needs to weigh more seriously?